Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Let's go together. If you are new to this channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss out any of our future videos. Today we are going to discuss another important design pattern in software development, the Iterator Design Pattern. So Iterator Design Pattern, it's a behavioral design pattern. It is used when we want to provide a way to access the elements of collection subsequently without exposing the underlying representation. So means, for example, we have collections like array, array list, map, tree, or graph, right? So for client code, we want to provide a uniform way to traverse the elements of these collections. We don't want the client to think about the internal representation of different collections. We just want to provide a common way to traverse the elements of all these collections. So this way, this pattern promotes decoupling between the collection and the client code. So you can see we have different data structures, or we can say collections. For example, tree, the way to access the elements of tree is different than the way to access the elements of list. And similarly, the map has a different internal data structure. So the way to access the elements of a map is quite different, right? And if client is dealing with all these data structures, so we just want to provide a common interface or a common way to traverse the elements of these data structures. In this situation, Iterator Design Pattern helps us to provide such interface to the client code to access the elements of different data structures in a common way. So when we are traversing the complex data structures such as tree, graphs, or linked lists, and we want to traverse it without exposing their internal structures to the client, the iterator provides a simple way to access the elements without the need to know how they are organized internally. So next point is uniform access to the collections. So as I already told, like we want to provide a common way to access the elements of different data structures. So iterator pattern helps to provide that common way. And another thing is different ways to iterate. So basically, if we want to support multiple ways to traverse the collections, for example, forward, backward, or in some custom order, right? So we can create different iterator implementations to support those different ways to iterate. So I hope the purpose of iterator design pattern is clear to us now. So let's discuss the components of iterator design pattern. So components of iterator design pattern. So the first component of iterator design pattern is iterator interface. So this interface defines the method for traversing elements in a collection. So it typically includes next, has next, current, or remove methods. And we can add additional methods as per the requirement. Or we can say this interface allows different type of iterators to be created for different collections. So the next component is concrete iterator. So concrete iterator is the implementation of iterator interface. And concrete iterator keeps the track of current position in the collection and implements the method for iterating over the collection elements. So means if iterator interface contain these methods, so concrete iterator would be having the implementation for these methods, which can be used on the collection. So one thing more I want to add here is, so for example, client is dealing with multiple collections, right? So each collection will be having its own concrete iterator. So for example, if client has an array based collection, so then the client would be having array iterator, while a linked list based collection might have a linked list iterator. So next component is aggregate interface, or we can call it collection interface. So this interface contains one method, create iterator. So this method is used to return an instance of iterator for the collection. So the next component is concrete aggregate, right? So concrete aggregate is the implementation of aggregate interface, and this is the actual collection of objects. So the final component is client code, the client code that uses the iterator to traverse through the elements of a collection. The client does not need to know the internal structure of the collection. It just uses the iterator to access the elements. So let's jump into the code to understand iterator design pattern practically. So how we can implement this design pattern in Java. So let's create class book, and this class has properties private string title and private string author. And let me create the parameterized constructor to initialize these properties. So finally, let me override toString method just to print the values of book properties. Similarly, we have one class magazine, and this class has two properties, private string name and private string publisher, right? And let me create parameterized constructor to initialize these properties. And finally, toString method. So these are our basic classes. So these classes we will be using for our collections. So as per our components diagram, so let's create our first interface, that is iterator interface. And this is the interface, and we are making it generic. So it has one method next and one boolean method has next. So let's create the concrete iterator, the second component. Let me create one class, that is book iterator. So as I mentioned, like for each collection, for example, I will be having one collection for books and I will be having another collection for magazines. So each collection will be having its own iterator. So I am creating first iterator, that is book iterator. That would be the implementation of our iterator interface. And let me override the methods next and has next, right? So in this class, we have one array list, private array list of book type. So let's call it books. We have another variable, private int position, right? So as I mentioned in the components, so the iterator class contains the current position of the iterator, right? So that's why we declared this variable to keep track of the current position. So let me create the constructor to initialize the array list, and next method will be returning the book object as per the current position. So in this next method, we are returning the book object as per the current position and incrementing the position by 1. And our has next method, it will be returning true or false on the basis of if it has further elements to traverse or it is already at the last. So what we can do, so if position is less than books.size, so it means, so we have further elements, so it will be returning true, otherwise it will be returning the false. So if the position value is equal to the book size, right? So let me create the next iterator. So let's call it magazine iterator. Again, this class will be the implementation of iterator interface. So let's override the interface methods. So this iterator is basically to traverse the elements of a hash map, right? So for that, what I need to do, let me declare one variable, private iterator iterator. So this iterator is from the util package, right? So let me create the constructor of this class. So this constructor accepts hashmap of string and magazine type. Let's call it magazines. And we will be initializing our iterator. So hashmap collection, it contains the iterator method on the top of these values. So what we are doing, so we are fetching the values of hashmap, and then to traverse those values, we are using the iterator. And in our next method, we will be using this iterator, and we will be using this iterator in our has next method as well. So how we can do that? So here iterator dot next, the values in this hash map are of magazine type, but the next method of this iterator, returns type object. So you can see here. So it is returning object, right? So to get the magazine object, we need to typecast this. And has next method returns true or false. And in iterator, we have method has next. So we can use this. So this is our internal implementation inside the magazine iterator. But from end client point of view, he will be using next and has next exactly the way we have used in book iterator, right? So in book iterator, we have next and has next. Similarly, in magazine iterator, we have next and has next. So client code is concerned with these two methods directly, right? So what is the internal implementation of our collections? Here we are using the hash map, right? And in book iterator, we have array list. So similarly, we can have another iterator which is working on tree, or maybe we can have another iterator which is working on graph, right? But for client code, we will be exposing these two methods only. So now, as per this diagram, so we have created our iterator interface with two methods, next and has next. And we have two implementations of this interface. One is book iterator and another is magazine iterator. So now we will be creating our aggregate interface, which will be containing the method create iterator. So let's create interface aggregate. So let's call it aggregate itself, right? So aggregate interface, and again, this is the generic aggregate. So we have one method of iterator type. So basically iterator interface, and let's call it create iterator, right? So we have created aggregate interface. So as per this diagram, so we have aggregate interface, which is collection, and now we need to create actual collection, so which is concrete aggregate, or we can see the implementation of this interface. So as we have two classes, one is book and another is magazine. So we will be creating two collections. One is book collection and another is magazine collection. So let me create another class that is book collection. So this is the implementation of aggregate interface. Aggregate, and the type is book. So implements create interface, right? And in this class, as I said, this is the collection class, right? So it will be having the actual collection object. So let me create the constructor to initialize this collection. And we have another method to add the values in this collection. So public void add book. So client will be passing the book object here in this method. And we will be adding this book object into our collection, that is books array list, right? And here create iterator. So this is the method which will be returning the iterator to traverse this array list, right? And for this book type array list, we have book iterator, right? Which accepts the array list of books. So now here, what we will be returning new book iterator, and we are passing the books array list. So now see, this is the book collection. We have this array list. We are initializing this, and we can add the values in this books. And finally, when the client will be calling the create iterator method, so what we will be doing? So we are returning the object of books iterator. And in books iterator, so this array list we are passing here. So we have next and has next methods to traverse this books array list as per current position, or has next method will be returning if the collection has more objects to traverse. And this method will be returning false if there is no further element once all the elements are traversed. So just like books collection, we have magazines collection. So let me create the class. So magazine collection. And this is also the implementation of aggregate. So implements aggregate, and this time type is magazine, and we need to override the methods. So basically we have one method create iterator. So let me create property hashmap. So in our books collection we have array list, and here in magazines collection, so let me add a different collection, so that is hashmap. So this would be of string and magazine type. So let's call it magazines, and I am initializing here right away. We have a method to add the values in this. So public void add magazine, and we will be passing one key and one magazine object. And here let's add this value into this map using this key. So magazines dot put key and magazine, right? So this is our another collection, or we can say concrete implementation of aggregate, which has one hash map. We have one add magazine method, so we are adding the values in this collection. And finally in iterator interface, so we need to return magazine iterator. So just like in books collection we returned book iterator, right? So similarly in this magazines collection we will be returning magazine iterator, because this is the different type of collection, and for that we need a different iterator. So here in this method, let me return new magazine iterator, and let's pass magazines here. And now you can see whenever client will be calling this create iterator, so client will be getting the iterator for these magazines collection, right? And in this iterator class, so you can see we have next and has next methods. So client is aware about these two methods, next and has next. So what is the internal implementation? He is not aware about that. So these things are completely abstract from the client. So let's finally create the client class here. And we have main method here. So let me create book collection. Right. So we need to make one change here in book collection. So because this is a collection itself, so we need not to initialize this array list collection from client code. So what we are doing, so let me remove this, and we can initialize the array list here in book collection itself, right? So we want to keep client away from the internal implementation. So whatever the collection we have, so that would be in the collection class itself, right? So that's why I just removed that parameterized constructor, and we are initializing this array list here inside the collection itself. So now, so here in this class, so if we are calling it book collection, it means it is the collection object itself for the client. So whatever we will be adding in this collection object itself. So client is not aware about the internal data structure, so which is being used inside the book collection, right? So here let me add some books. For example, book collection dot add book and new book. So we need to pass title and author. For example, design patterns and author Parvinder. In our books collection, we have added some objects. Similarly, we have magazine collection. So let's call it magazine collection, and let me add some values. Magazine collection dot add magazine. This add method accepts two things, key and value, right? So we have one key, for example, tech times, new magazine, and magazine has further name and publisher, right? So name is, let me take the same name as key, and tech time publisher. Now we have two collections, book collection and magazine collection, right? And both these collections has some values, and inside this book collection we have array list to hold these values, and inside this magazine collection we have hashmap to keep these values, right? Now from client perspective, so client want to traverse both these collections. So to traverse we have iterators. So let's create books iterator. So iterator interface of book type, let's call it book iterator, equals to books collection dot create iterator, right? And similarly we can create iterator interface of magazine type. So magazine iterator, and from magazine collection we have called create iterator, right? To print the books, so let me print the books here, and we know we have method while book iterator has values, right? So to check the values, so we have this has next method. So if this is returning true, so we can print book iterator dot next, so which will be giving the book object, and we are printing that. Similarly, so after printing all the books, if I want to print magazines, so let me put a space here between books and magazines, and while magazine iterator has next, we are printing magazine iterator dot next, right? So here let me run this program. So you can see the output. So books, so we have used books iterator to print these values, and similarly for magazines we have magazine iterator to fetch these details, right? Let's quickly review what we have done so far. So we created two object classes, one is book and one is magazine, right? And then we created one iterator interface, so which is generic in nature, and we can define all our iterative methods, whatever the methods we want to provide while iterating the collections. So in our case we created just two methods, one is next and one is has next, and then we have two concrete classes of these iterators, right? So one is book iterator, and because we are implementing our iterator interface, so it makes certain like we will be definitely having these two methods, next and has next. Similarly we have magazine iterator, and again this is the implementation of iterator interface. It contains two methods, next and has next, and we are returning the value as per these methods purpose, right? And then we created the aggregate, which is the collection basically, and it returns the actual iterator for a particular type of collection, right? So we have create iterator method, and we have further two implementations of this interface. One is book collection. So create it iterator returns the object of book iterator here, and similarly we have magazine collection, which returns the iterator for magazines collection, right? So basically magazine iterator. And in client code we just added the values inside the collections, so it is book collection and magazine collection, and finally we created the iterators to traverse these collections. So in this way this client code is completely unaware about the internal implementation of our collections, and it has simply two methods, has next and next, to traverse the items of these collections. So this is all about iterator design pattern, how we can iterate different type of collections in a uniform way. This way iterator makes the code clean and flexible. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe the channel for more useful tutorials. So thanks for watching, and as always, happy coding.